Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. Now in my last video I actually mentioned that I'm not going to be doing Tuesday tips, that I was going to rather do random videos that I would be uploading, and I must say I had quite a response to that. I got emails and I also received messages, people asking me to please carry on with the Tuesday tips. So I'm listening to you. We are carrying on with the Tuesday tips. Now for this tips and techniques video for this week, I thought let's look a little bit at tricky fabrics. How do I sew tricky fabrics? I don't even want to say difficult to sew fabrics because that puts us off a little bit. So I'm just going to say tricky fabrics, because as soon as when you know how to sew that fabric, I'm going to tell you, you won't shy away from those fabrics anymore. So I've done another cardigan for myself, and I'm sure you guys are recognizing it. It is the Harper cardigan, and I actually used one of those tricky fabrics so that I can show you how it looks and also talk through my seam finishes that I do when I'm working with these sorts of fabrics. Now this is called a symphony lace. And look at the photo I'm showing you. It is really it's almost like a lacy netting sort of fabric. It's got stretch in both ways. So I had to really think, how am I going to finish the seams? Other fabrics that I pulled out of my stash as well, just to show you, it's also this sort of fabric. I'm sure you guys have seen this. I'm just coming closer. It's almost like I think you can see it. It's almost like a little bit of a webbing, or it looks like a spider web if I look at it. So this one is also, I would classify really as a tricky fabric. We've got to consider what we do with this when we are going to sew it. And then also another one that I have, I've been sitting with this one for a while, and it almost looks like a crochet piece of fabric. So if I come closer with that, can you see this one as well? And if you would notice with all these fabrics that I'm showing you, there is really no stability to this fabric, especially if we are looking at this one. There is absolutely no stability. We've got all these open spots. So I can't just go to my sewing machine and sew it. My stitches, first of all, there's no place for the stitches to really grip and stabilize my fabric. So that's one thing that I've got to consider. And I've really got to make sure that if I'm going to finish it as well, if we look at the edges, can you see that edge? I know already I can't go and just fold under a hem or just fold it in somewhere to finish it. So that's what I wanted to chat to you about, is what do I do? How do I look at that fabric? What do I decide to do with it? Now, when I know I'm going to work with these fabrics, there's two things that I always consider. Now, for me, the most important one is what seam finish can I do with that fabric? I will literally go and cut a strip off my fabric, and I will do different seam finishes until I'm happy with the results that I'm getting. And I'm really telling you guys, play with it, because not one fabric is going to react the same as another fabric. All of them have got their own personality. So each one wants their own special attention. So you've got to figure out what they want. So that is just how I approach it if I'm working with this fabric. So I will do all sorts of tests and see what I'm happy with. Because once I've done that part of the process, I know it's going to be easy sewing from there on. I'm not going to mess up my fabric. I'm not going to get headaches and get frustrated when I'm sewing it. So that's one thing to consider. The next thing, and if we look at my pattern as well, is what sort of pattern are you going to use? Because now I know already what seam finish I'm going to do. I know I can't just go fold under a hem or anything like that. I even played and did a bit of a binding on the edge to see what it looks like. It doesn't look nice. So I knew I needed something that if I work the pattern or cut that pattern, it's going to give me that really professional look that I do want. And that's why the Harper cardigan was for me a great choice for this specific fabric, because I could take from this twin set, this tank top that I made, I could take some of this fabric and I could go and do my band with it. And I also cut strips of it, and I sewed those strips into my seams to actually keep the stability of that seam and give me that very, very nice finish. So that is what I will look at for the pattern. With this specific fabric also, I didn't want any extra seams. I didn't want princess lines. I knew I had to steer away from that, because I didn't want these solid lines running through, or that you can see through the fabric, because of the sheerness of this fabric. Look at that if I do that. It's just such a sheer fabric. So that is what I consider. I consider my seam allowance, or my seams, how am I going to finish it? what pattern will work with this fabric so that I know I'm going to make it easy for myself to sew. One thing that I also did want to mention with this tank top that I did, if you look at this, I actually just went and I added a bit of lace to finish at the bottom. And because I did the lace, I decided on this cardigan, the Harper cardigan, that I wanted the shorter version because I wanted some of this lace to actually show through a little bit at the hem area as well. So I'll put this on at the end so you can see what it looks like. But let me just show you now close up what I consider and how I did my seams. Let's have a closer look at the fabric of my cardigan that I worked with. So you will notice that it is really sheer. You can see my hand showing through there as well. And if you also look, I'm going to zoom in closer. Can you see the open space that I have? So there's no stability to this fabric whatsoever. So I've got to know already, I'm going to consider how can I stabilize it, because a sewing straight stitch on a sewing machine does not work on this fabric. And before we look on the inside of for my seam allowances, also just look again at this. Can you see again what that looks like as well? Can you see how open this is? So this one I've really got to be very, very careful when I'm going to sew with it. So I've also got to make sure that I add structure to this fabric when I'm going to decide on my garment. Now let's have a look on the seam finishes that I've done. I knew that this will not be an easy sew if I'm going to sew it on my sewing machine. So again, I went and I did everything on my overlocker. And let's just have a look here. So you can see that overlock stitch that I've done, and you can see that the stitches are secure as well. It's not hanging off the fabric, anything like that. And that is purely because I take some of my lycra that I did the tank top with, and I use this for my stabilizer. Now also looking at the finish here on the bands, you will notice that I went and I pressed the seams towards the solid fabric. I think I need to do one more press, but I purely did that because I didn't want to see that seam finish that I've done through the netting. So if you look at that, so everywhere where I've actually sewn on the band, even on the cuffs, I decided that I'm pressing them towards the solid fabric. So if you look at that as well, I'm not going to top stitch this area to keep the seam flat. I might catch it here and there by hand, but I'm just worried with this fabric, as soon as I go do a top stitch, I'm stretching out the fabric, and I'm just very careful, so I'm not going to do that. So that is what the finish looks like, even on the shoulders. If you look at this, if you look at the arm, that armhole as well. Now, what I do when I decide to stabilize it, I try and work with the same color that I'm working with, and you can see also it's the same color as the band. And I don't just go and cut the strip and start sewing it, because I've got to make sure that my seam finish on the side seam, whatever the pattern length is, that it's still on my fabric. With this fabric that's got about no structure, the more let's say the fabric has got that open spots, the more I'm going to have a problem that I might not end up having the same seam length or side seam length that I'm going to need, or the same shoulder length. So that is one thing that I immediately consider. So let's have a look at my pattern pieces now. So I would cut strips of my lycra, and I would go back to my pattern, and I will make sure that if I'm sewing the shoulder, the lycra is going to be the correct length for my shoulder. This lycra is keeping me aware of what's happening with my fabric when I'm sewing it. Remember, if that fabric is really unstable, I want to use the word unstable because it's got these open sections, then I know I'm going to get a seam that's not going to be accurate if I don't make sure this is accurate. And I've tested it and I could see it happening. So what I do, I take my strip, and this pattern specifically, I've got 6mm seam allowance on the neck area. I've got 6mm seam allowance on the shoulder point. So that is 1.2. You can either mark it on your pattern and just get that length, or if I put it for the full pattern there, then I would go and measure and I will take off my 1.2. I actually rounded it off to 1.5 centimeters, and then I would cut the strip for the shoulders. So when I did the sleeve, I actually overlapped the shoulder So again, I go over by 6 millimeter, and we know we've got a 6 millimeter seam allowance at the underarm points, and I went and I measured the armhole as well, and that was the length that I cut again of my strip. So when I went and I pinned my sleeve to my bodice, I actually pinned this in immediately with it, and you only need one strip, even on the shoulder, only one strip, and I always put my strip onto the back bodice section. So again, I measured that, sewed it together, and then once I do have the sleeve on, remember we go and sew it from the hem all the way to the sleeve. So I measured this section plus my sleeve, again excluding seam allowances. I went a little bit smaller again, I just rounded it off. If you take off about 1 centimeter on that whole length, that is fine. So I determined what that length should be, and when I sewed it, it was absolutely accurate. When I don't do that, and I'm just going to talk you through this now, look what's happening. Here I sewed it, and I want you to really look at that wave that I have. So this section was sewn without the stabilizer. There's no stability to that seam whatsoever. Now, again, this fabric reacted differently every time I did my test sew. And I had exactly the same settings, and I just went ahead and I just cut a strip before measuring even what that length was. I just cut a strip of my Lycra, and look, it still gave me a bit of a wave. And I want you to have a look at this. You'll see certain sections it is flat, certain sections it waved and then flat again. So this is really for me an unstable fabric. As soon as I had a section where I had that more of a solid for the floral, that area went flat. But in between, that is where I picked up the problem. So I knew I had to keep that seam stable. And then the last section that I want to show you now, and this is at the end what my seam looks like. I went ahead and I measured, and if we now look at it, that is the strip that I'm sewing in, and then you can see that section I always trim next to my stitches. And now again, if I have to open it, look at that. If I go press it flat, it gives me a nice finish on there. So that is basically what I did to make sure that I had no stretch out seams, that I didn't go and change the length or anything like that. Last tip that I wanted to give you as well when you're working with this fabric has got a little bit of a wave in it, and I didn't want to go and press it so that it is all, everything is flat, and it loses that texture almost of what that wave is creating. So when I pressed my seams, I actually used my tailor's ham this way, and I made sure that it was lying flat, and I literally went and I just pressed on this section. Working with a smaller iron as well, I found it was easier because I could really just take that tip of my iron, that point, and just work on that area and not press on the rest of my fabric. So that was also something that I had to consider. How am I pressing it to keep my seams flat? So if you look at that and you follow those steps, and you always go stabilize the seams, always measure from your pattern and make sure that whatever that length there is the length that your stabilizing strip is. When you start pinning and sewing it, I just wanted to maybe do it on this side. When you start pinning and sewing it, then it was so easy for me because I could put it on one section. I could also get the middle section. I could pin it there. This one is too short now, but I just wanted to show you. And then I would go and I'll pin on that section as well. So I knew whatever I'm sewing is going to be correct. And obviously, again, working with an overlocker, I did test it a little bit with my differential feed to make sure that I wasn't getting any stretch on the fabric, even though I used my stabilizing strip as well. So that is basically what I do, and that just simplifies it for me, makes it easier for me when I'm sewing with these sorts of fabrics. Let's have a look at my cardigan now. So if you are looking at it, you will see that I've got a little bit of the tank top, the lace sticking out. I've just actually put a belt on with this one now. And I'm just going to come closer. I just want you to see on the shoulders. Can you see there? There's not a lot of that seam. Look at the back there. You know, I've kept the seam nice and narrow as well, and you'll see nowhere whatsoever, even if I look at the side seam, there is absolutely no pulling, no puckering, no stretching out. So as I said when I was talking you through the process, what I did, that when I overlocked it without any of that lycra that I used for stabilizing the seam, I had a problem that some areas it was actually almost like gathering it in a little bit, and other areas it was stretching it out. So that is what I do when I work with these fabrics. I always make sure that I know I'm not going to stretch out the fabric, I'm going to stabilize the fabric, and then, as I said, with the Harper cardigan, perfect finish for this sort of fabric. Now, I know I'm going to get questions about this fabric that I've got. It's like a light powdery blue. I do have stock of this fabric, so I just wanted to show you. So I still have stock of this one. It is actually called Symphony Lace, and the lycra is a Bershka lycra that I have. Now, they are selling for 100 Rand a meter. I am actually busy cleaning out, so I am marking down all my fabrics. So that will be from Friday. I'm going to put it on sale with my linens, and I'm actually going below cost with these fabrics just to do a bit of a clean out. If you're following me on Facebook, you would have seen I actually uploaded a video on Facebook to show you what my studio looks like after I cleaned it out. And from there, after cleaning out here, I actually just went into the store section and I started cleaning out. So I'm putting a lot of goodies on sale for you. I'll do a Friday feature on Friday, and then I will just show you everything that's on sale, mention to you where you will be able to get the sale prices as well. So look out for that. If you're looking at this one as well, this little jacket that I did, again, it almost looks like it's been crocheted. So this was my first time this is years ago, but this was my first time really working with the tricky fabric. Here I was still battling a little bit, and if I compare what I did there to here, it is so much easier now that I actually know how to handle these fabrics. But this specific one, I actually went ahead and I did a princess line on this one, and I did a little bit of a peplum as well. I must be honest, if I redo it, I don't know if I'll do a princess line again, because I don't know if you can notice it, but I can still see that solid line running there. But nevertheless, I do wear this jacket. I love this jacket. It is just such a beautiful lacy crochet sort of fabric that I made this with. So again, if you're going to go fabric shopping, look at all these beautiful fabrics that's out there. There is just amazing fabrics. And once you know how to sew those fabrics, just imagine what you can do with your wardrobe. It can just grow and grow with all these beautiful fabrics.